Webster Groves, Missouri. The following events took place in a 2-story wood and brick structure that was built in the 1890s. The new owners, the Fergusons, had moved into the house in 1956, and from the beginning, Mrs. Ferguson was being woken up at exactly 2 a.m. night after night by being shaken awake and then heard something beating on the windows. Then she started hearing footsteps walking up and down the stairs day and night, which always ended up on the upstairs landing. Yet her husband had heard nothing. However, one night Mr. Ferguson was awakened to see a white shape go through the wall towards their daughter's bedroom, but when he jumped out of bed to check, there was nothing to be seen. However, the following morning at breakfast, their 3-year-old daughter asked, "Who is the lady dressed in black with a little boy in hand that keeps coming into her room at night?" She later complained that the lady would often try to hit her with a broom, but it didn't hurt. After 9 years, they moved out. In 1965, another family called the Walshes moved into the house with a 10-year-old daughter, and at first found the house pleasant. A short time later, as she was preparing dinner, she noticed their dog was cringing in fear. Then all of a sudden, a white cloud shaped like a human floated through the open door into the living room. In the evenings, she started to feel unseen noisy presences roaming around. Mrs. Walsh then started to notice that the door to the attic was always open. One evening, she heard the door to the attic open and close 4 times. Then the whole family would hear footsteps going up to the attic. Every night she closed the attic door. In the morning, she found it open. One morning, she went into the attic, into a small room where they stored furniture, and found everything had been moved and the heavy drawers had been opened, but not by any member of their family. One day, when her daughter was playing in the garden, she heard the small footsteps of a child running through the dining room and kitchen. She now realized there was both an adult and a child spirit present. One day, Mr. Walsh was downstairs at home by himself and heard a child running around upstairs. The family now realized that a family from the past, unaware of the passage of time, were living in their house. The Walshes eventually moved out, only to leave the house to the mercy of the next tenants. Lugo Avenue, Linwood, California. In the early 1950s, Naomi and her husband were house hunting in Linwood, California, and spotted what they believed to be their ideal house that was for sale in Lugo Avenue. It was an old European house with stone walls covered in vines and shrubbery. The property showed signs of neglect and everything was overgrown. However, they still bought the house, and after months of effort in both house and garden, they managed to bring it back to its original state. One hot morning, as Naomi was at home by herself working in the garden, she suddenly looked up and was startled to see a smallish elderly lady not more than a metre away on the path, dressed in old-fashioned clothes that appeared to be from another era. The elderly lady then apologised for the intrusion and said in a high-pitched voice whether it would be all right to look around a bit, and as Naomi was about to reply, the elderly lady said, "You see, my husband and I originally built this house." The two women then walked around having a long conversation about how beautiful the garden was, and the old lady went from flower to flower, smelling and admiring them. And she said she was so happy that the house and garden had been brought back to life. The lady then wanted to look at the patio, where they came upon a rose bush, and whispered to Naomi they were her favourites. Naomi then offered to cut some roses for the elderly lady to take home. But as she turned around to grab the scissors, she suddenly turned back to find the lady suddenly gone, and thought it rather rude to disappear without saying a word. So Naomi thought she could not have gone far and decided to catch up to her. But as she ran out to the street, the lady was nowhere to be seen. In her fragile state, she could not have moved that quickly, yet she had completely disappeared. A few weeks later, Naomi had tea with a neighbour opposite and talked about her elderly visitor, who claimed to have built the house. Her neighbour said that it was impossible because that elderly lady whom she had been describing had been dead for many, many years. New York. Parker Keegan was a truck driver and his wife Rebecca was an artist and had 2 young children. In December 1964, they moved into an old pre-Civil War 2-story house with a large staircase. They shared half the house with Rebecca's teenage cousin, Jane. Rebecca spent most nights by herself as her husband was out on the road, but one night she heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, and she was joined by her cousin Jane, who also heard them. The steps were of a heavy man, but the strangest thing was that she did not hear the front door unlock. Well, they both believed it was a burglar. However, they saw nothing until suddenly they observed the stairs bending as if someone was walking up them, and then it reached the top of the stairs. On hearing this, they suddenly ran into their bedrooms, terrified. After this incident, Jane moved out of the house, leaving Rebecca alone. Not only did Rebecca continue to hear the footsteps at night, she was now hearing someone crying on the empty side of the house, and was also hearing cupboards downstairs opening and closing in rapid succession. Fortunately, on this occasion, her husband was at home and went downstairs to inspect the noise, and on immediately entering the room, the noise stopped. However, as soon as he got back into bed, the noise resumed, so he ran back downstairs only to have the noise stop again as he entered the room. To make matters worse, Rebecca was also starting to see doorknobs move by themselves. When Rebecca started work, she initially had her mother babysit, but her mother did not stay long, and then her sister Mary offered. One day when Mary was looking out of the living room window, a face appeared, and on another occasion, objects would fly out of her hands. One afternoon, Mary was holding a cup when it suddenly flew out of her hands and landed at her husband's feet. Shortly after, Mary left the house. Then her sister-in-law Susan offered to stay, and shortly after, she witnessed objects fly off the shelves, cupboard doors opening and closing, and heard the footsteps on the stairwell. She said she would never stay there alone. On Christmas Eve 1966, Rebecca saw an angry man's face staring through the window and grabbed the gun. But then the face disappeared, and they ran outside to check but could find no sign of anybody. Early in April, Rebecca and Parker were in the bedroom when they saw the form of an intense blue light cross from where the telephone was over their bed and down the stairs. As it crossed past the phone, it made the phone ring, and as it reached the bottom of the stairs, it made that phone ring. Tired of living with all this paranormal drama, then had enough and moved out. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Ghost stories have been around for hundreds of years, and every culture has their strange ghost tales to tell. There is no doubt that ghost stories will always be with us and have become part of our folklore. But what causes ghosts to appear is interesting, as there appear to be different types of hauntings. In some cases, the ghost is aware of your presence and may attempt to communicate in a friendly manner or is downright evil. Another type of eerie event is called a residual haunting, which is not exactly a ghost but a playback of a past event and will repeat this over and over again. For example, have you read about a spirit that walks across a room then appears to walk through a non-existent door? However, you'll find later that there used to be a door in that location. It seems residual hauntings can go on for centuries, where in some cases people have even seen Roman armies marching down a road that no longer exists. The following are 4 true stories told by Australians about their experiences with the supernatural. Number 4. The following story was told by an elderly lady many years ago about eerie events that happened to her when she was a young woman. She said, "My father and myself had recently moved into a current house in the late 19th century in Albert Park, a suburb of Melbourne. When we first moved in, there was an eerie atmosphere and was always freezing even when it was hot outside, and it always felt depressing. Because I did not like the atmosphere, I hated being alone, and after a while, I had this strange feeling that somebody was watching me. One morning, when I was in the kitchen washing up, it suddenly became freezing cold. I remember that I turned around for some reason, and then I saw her, a little girl standing in the doorway, but not watching me, but looking down at the floor. She was milky white, and I could see through her. I thought, my God, it's a ghost, a real ghost. Strangely though, I wasn't frightened, but I was just thinking, I will never forget this moment. The young girl looked about 8 years old and wore the sort of clothes I did when I was young, such as buttoned-up boots, a white frilly dress with an apron over it, and she had long hair. But I couldn't help thinking how terribly sad she looked, and then she suddenly disappeared. I was able to find out that many years ago a couple lived in the house with an only child, a little girl about 8 years old who had died of pneumonia, and her description fitted the girl I had seen. A few months later my father had lost his job, so we hatched again a boarder, a young school teacher. Unfortunately, she did not stay very long. One morning she came down to breakfast and asked, "Who was the young girl who came into my room last night?" My father said, "Young girl? There's no young girl living here." She said, "But there must be. She's about 8, with long hair, wearing a long white dress. I woke up and it was terribly cold, and there she was, bending over and looking at me." She then said, "There's something funny going on in this house, and I'm not staying." And with that she immediately packed and left. Number 3. The next story was told by Pauline of Lane Cove, New South Wales, of an event that happened to her in 1976. She had just started working as a babysitter in the suburb of Sydney called Hunters Hill. It was an old house perched on the edge of Sydney Harbour. It was her first night on the job, and after her parents left for the opera, Pauline checked that the children were fast asleep and then found a well-stocked library and settled down to read. She said that around 10:30 p.m. I started feeling very cold and went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea. She sat down with her tea and everything was quiet until she suddenly heard a deep sigh. She thought it must be from the wind outside. Then she heard the sigh again, but this time it was deeper and louder, and it was coming from behind her. She spun around and there was a greyish-white figure of a woman standing on the stairs, in a long dress with a shawl around her shoulders and long hair hanging down. Her face was in shadow, so she couldn't tell her age, and her clothes were very old-fashioned, and she just stood there motionless, except for her hands. She was wringing her hands as though she was terribly agitated. Strange though, I wasn't scared. I was fascinated and calm, and I said to her, "Hello, who are you?" She did not reply, but stood there wringing her hands. Then she started to move towards me. Not walking, but appeared to glide as if her feet were off the floor. I didn't move. I wasn't game to. And then she went right past me towards a door leading to the back garden and vanished. When the parents came home, I said to them, "You have a ghost," and he replied quietly, "Yes, there is a spirit with us." The mother then said, "Well, myself and my daughter have seen it too." I was surprised they were so calm. I asked them, "Do you know who she is and why she's here?" "Oh yes," the wife replied. "I did some research and found she was a servant girl around the turn of the century, and apparently she was married to a sailor who one day went to sea and never came back. His ship must have gone down somewhere and she refused to believe it, and spent all of her spare moments in the garden waiting for him to come home." I asked them why they did not warn me, and they said, "We tried warning previous babysitters and they wouldn't stay, and we didn't want to be stuck again without a babysitter." Number 2. Pat Cleary lived in Sydney and belonged to a strict Roman Catholic family, so anything to do with spirits or psychics in general was seen as evil. But what happened to her at 2 a.m. one morning made her question her Catholic faith. There was a loud voice saying, "Wake up, Pat, wake up," and she recognised the voice as that of her sister who had died 12 months previously. Because Pat always overslept, believes it was her sister telling her to get up for work. But things were about to get weirder when one morning she saw her sister standing by the side of her bed, dressed in the kind of clothes that she used to wear, and looked as solid as if she were still alive. However, this time her sister did not say a word, but just smiled at her. Pat was petrified and she just laid there afraid to speak. And then her sister slowly faded and disappeared. After that, her sister appeared on a number of occasions, and each time she woke me with the same words. And once she appeared with the spirit of their late mother, who sat on the end of her bed. The visits went on for about 9 months, and then just stopped. Pat then visited her priest, who said she was being tempted by evil spirits, and Pat just looked at him and said, "Why would someone who looked like my sister bother to visit me at 2 a.m. in the morning, telling me to wake up or smile at me?" The priest had no explanation. Pat later visited a spiritualist church in Parramatta, where a medium communicated with her dead brother, who told her not to worry about what she'd been taught, but to go her own way. Pat was later to find out that the reason she was able to see her sister and mother was because she was psychic and decided to develop her own powers and became a medium. She left the Catholic Church and later became president of the Enmore Spiritual Church in Sydney. Number 1. In 1969, Jean Robertson and her husband lived in Sydney and lived next door to a couple who had a 12-year-old daughter called Linda, who had long blonde hair. Jean said that as she was an only child, the parents doted on her and gave her everything. Unfortunately, the child was an asthmatic and one day suffered a serious attack where she died. Linda's parents were so devastated that they could no longer stay in the house and abruptly left. The house was let out, and in the following months, a succession of tenants moved in and out. One of the tenants was chatting with Jean and said that she was not happy living there as it was always cold and she always had the feeling that there was somebody else in the house with them. In 1972, a couple moved in and introduced themselves and asked whether anything unusual had ever happened in the house. Jean was reluctant to tell them about the young girl who tragically died a few years earlier. Jean then said, "Why do you ask?" The woman said that the previous night she'd had a nightmare. When she woke up, the bedclothes were everywhere and also screwed up on her hands. In her dream, a little girl about 12 years old with long blonde hair came to her. Jean then asked if the young girl had given her name, and the woman said yes. She said her name was Linda. That couple eventually moved out, and another couple with 2 young children moved in. A short time later, the new neighbours befriended a few of the other neighbours and asked one of them, called Judy, who lived across the road, whether she would babysit for them, as they wanted to go out to celebrate their wedding anniversary. By this time, most people in the street were aware of the house's reputation and were reluctant to go inside. However, Judy decided to help them out and agreed to babysit. On entering the property, Judy noticed that their German Shepherd refused to go inside and just stood outside with his tail down and preferred to stay out in the cold. Judy went inside and checked that the children were asleep, and as she was walking down the hallway towards the back of the house, she heard a child call out, "Mummy, Mummy!" She quickly ran into the bedroom to see which child was awake, but found them both fast asleep. Puzzled, she proceeded down the hall again, which was littered with suitcases and unpacked boxes. But as she got closer, they all seemed to spread apart, and standing quite still and as plain as day stood Linda, holding a painting of sunflowers in a gold frame. Judy said the apparition called Mummy 3 times and then disappeared, whereas the boxes closed in again as before. Judy was terrified, but forced herself to stay until the parents came home and said that wild horses would not make her go back into that house. They made inquiries about the painting, where a friend of the dead girl's parents told them that there had been a sunflower painting in the house, painted by the young girl's mother. Some weeks later, an elderly aunt of Jean came to visit her and said that as she was walking past a neighbour's house, she saw a young girl standing on the balcony with long blonde hair. However, the young couple with the 2 young children were not at home. They were away on holiday. For hundreds of years, travellers have experienced strange happenings whilst on their journey, seeing or meeting strange apparitions such as highway ghosts, phantom hitchhikers, and other spirit beings. The following 8 cases might make you think twice before you take that next trip. Number 8. Yorkshire, England. In the late 1960s, a coach driver was returning from a job. The coach was empty and he was heading home to Manchester. It was early in the morning and he was making his way down unlit country lane when suddenly, from nowhere, a woman dressed in a long white dress stepped out in front of the coach, waving her arms for him to stop. The driver slammed on the brakes, but large vehicles are unable to suddenly grind to a halt, and he ran over her. After stopping, the driver leapt from the vehicle, fearing he'd hit the woman. He checked all around the coach and the road, but could see nothing. He then checked beneath the vehicle. Nothing. He got a torch and checked everywhere. Nothing. No blood, no clothing, no sign of the woman. He guessed he'd imagined everything. But then he suddenly glanced at a farmer's field hundreds of metres away. There in the distance, in the dark, stood the woman in white, waving her arms. Number 7. Queensland, Australia. Mark had been a paraplegic for nearly 30 years, but when he was young, in the 1980s, he often rode whilst stoned and intoxicated and rode his bike fast. One night, about 12:30 a.m, he was riding along the Bruce Highway in Queensland. Suddenly, he felt the bike lower under the weight of another person and felt the tingling sensation of arms around his waist and a chin resting against his back. To make matters even more frightening, the lights from oncoming cars revealed a pair of skeletal arms wrapped around his waist, which caused him to lose control and crash his bike into an oncoming car. He woke up weeks later from a coma as a paraplegic. Was this a warning that came too late, or a deadly premonition? Number 6. Massachusetts, USA. For more than 30 years, a red-headed man has been seen walking down Route 44 in Massachusetts. At times, he's seen hitchhiking, and other times, he's been seen walking into the woods or in the middle of the road, not moving as cars passed through him. Once he was seen outside the window of a car that was moving at more than 40 miles per hour. He is described as being about 6 foot, well built, with red hair and a red beard, and wearing jeans and a red flannel shirt. People who have seen him say his eyes appear lifeless. Hitchhikers that tried to interact with him would suddenly see him vanish before their eyes, but after vanishing, he would then laugh. A woman reported stopping to pick the man up, but he disappeared as he went to grab the door handle. Her car battery then died, and then she heard a man laughing at her, though he could no longer be seen. Then minutes later, the car started. One man, who had been driving alone, saw the man on the side of the road. He stopped and called out to him, and the red-headed man started to walk towards him. But as he got closer, the ghost slowly faded until he completely disappeared. Another witness saw the man appear in the back seat of his car through the rear view mirror. The radio started to automatically scan stations and then became very loud, and the car vibrated. The man then disappeared and laughter was heard in the radio. Number 5. Belgian Tunnel, Switzerland. The Belgian Tunnel is 3.2 kilometres long and was built in the 1960s. One side of the tunnel has become well known for a phantom hitchhiker that will be picked up from the motorway only to vanish from the vehicle while still in the tunnel. The ghost is known as the White Lady, and is described as being an old woman dressed all in white and appears out of nowhere. One experience happened in 1983 when 2 female lawyers picked up this elderly lady dressed in white. They said she looked middle-aged and pale. Believing she may be ill, they inquired about her health, and the lady confirmed that she was not feeling at all. She then told the 2 women that something terrible was going to happen. Short time later, one of the women turned again to inquire about the White Lady's health, only to find she had vanished, and to make matters stranger, she had somehow alighted from a moving 2-door car. This is the story that many people have told of an old woman appearing on the road at night, and they slow down to assist her. She then hitches a ride, but after a few kilometres, she suddenly vanishes. The woman always looks sick and tired, and when drivers ask about her health, her reply is always the same, that something terrible is about to happen. Number 4. Dumfries, Scotland. Bob Sturgeon runs a snack van on the A75 near Dumfries, Scotland, and said it was regularly frequented by early morning truck drivers who witnessed strange happenings. One regular sighting were groups of dejected, bedraggled people pulling handcarts or carrying bundles like some medieval camp followers. One truck driver who had been parked on an A75 stretch of road woke up at about 3 a.m. frozen in fear as he witnessed strange groups of people walking along the road. For almost 50 years, some drivers are convinced they've run over ghosts and witnessed horsemen, carriages and phantom figures of men and women emerging from the dark. In 1957, a truck driver ran over a couple who were arm in arm crossing the road in front of his truck. But when he stopped, the couple had vanished. In 1995, Garson and Monica Miller were driving on the A75 when they saw the figure of a middle-aged man wearing a hessian sack folded over his head, and his hands were outstretched towards the direction of the car. Driving at 60 miles per hour, the couple were convinced they had hit the man, so then reversed back to the spot, but the figure had gone. In 1997, Donna Maxwell and the 2 children were travelling on the A75 when a man in his 30s with short hair, red top and dark trousers jumped out in front of the car, causing her to brake. Closing her eyes and bracing herself for impact, she was convinced she had hit him. But when she opened her eyes and looked around the car, there was no sign of the man. The police thoroughly searched the area, but there was no evidence of an accident. Number 3. Fukushima, Japan. Near Fukushima, where the 2011 tsunami hit, almost 6,000 people died, and taxi drivers have reported seeing ghosts with no heads, bodies that do not have limbs, and spirits of dead people. One such encounter was a female passenger who hailed a cab a few months after the disaster. The woman instructed the taxi driver to take her to Minamihama district, but he told the passenger that no one lives in that area due to the devastation caused by the tsunami. The woman replied, "Have I died?" And when the driver checked his passenger, the cab was empty. Another taxi driver recounted picking up a man in his 20s. When the taxi driver looked into the rearview mirror, he saw the man pointing towards the front of the car. When the driver asked the passenger his destination, the young man said, "To the mountain." However, when they reached the mountain, the passenger was nowhere to be found. Another taxi driver regularly sees ghosts wandering around the town and gets physical symptoms of tingling and depression when he's near them. Number 2. Tuen Mun, Hong Kong. This road was opened in 1977, and in the past 35 years there have been an extremely high number of car accidents, where many drivers who have been involved in the accidents said something mysterious had caused them to crash. Locals believe that ghosts cause some of these accidents by appearing out of nowhere, causing the drivers to swerve to avoid them. The ghosts that suddenly appear in the middle of the road have been causing many of the fatalities. The worst accident happened in 2003 when a truck driver lost control and ploughed into a passenger bus, where both ended up crashing through the guardrail and over a steep cliff, killing 21 people. Witnesses claim that at the time of the collision, they saw ghosts on the highway. Other drivers involved in accidents said something or someone took complete control of the steering wheel, causing them to lose control. Other drivers said they'd seen glowing eyes in the bushes that lined the freeway. However, it is not only locals that have reported witnessing ghosts. Many tourists who know nothing about the eerie stories reported seeing strange apparitions appearing in front of them. To make matters worse, it appears the ghosts of the crash victims are being added to the already high number of spirits. It is interesting to note that before the freeway was even built, the area was known for its hauntings. Number 1. Western Cape Province, South Africa. In 1968, a young couple were driving 200 miles east of Cape Town near Uniondale when they unfortunately crashed and the young woman was killed. In 1976, a young driver named Anton Lagrange picked up a young lady who got into the back of his car and after talking for just a few seconds, turned around to find she had gone. He went to the police station in Uniondale, where the policeman then drove behind him to locate where she'd disappeared, fearing she'd fallen out of the car. Whilst following him, he twice saw the rear door open and close by itself, whilst nobody got in or out of the vehicle. It was later revealed that the location that Anton had picked her up was where the young woman was killed in 1968. More amazingly, he was able to identify her in a photo, and her name was Maria Rue. In 1978, a man named Dwight Van Jaarsveld was riding his motorbike during the day when he stopped to pick up a young woman. She put on helmet and headphones to listen to music, but after about 1 kilometre, the bike appeared to wriggle, and as he looked back, she had completely vanished, with the helmet by his side and the headphones dangling loose. In 1980, on the same stretch of road, Andre Kurtzy was riding his motorbike when he suddenly felt some hands around his waist and realised he had taken on a passenger. Was it the same woman? He accelerated in fear, and after a few moments, she just disappeared.